because there's a debate here regarding the transfer of capacities, which I know that the regional authorities have faced important issues. I'm part of a metro, and Santiago is a city that moves millions of people in the subway, and this is almost like part of our heritage right now. It's part of the discussion that's taking place. We're currently in very shaky grounds, but all of this discussion really has to do with the formal rules of the game. Formal rule of the game. You know, we think that the legislation is written and we think that then things change. But as soon as a law gets passed, then we find a trick to get around it. And maybe in the north of Europe, what is the role then of these written and also the non-written roles on the way that things really work? In my particular case, I've tried to understand those non-written laws in the way that cities develop, and I think that we need to pay attention to those. And I'd like to mention a couple of things here. When we talk about non-written rules or laws, there's a certain framework that a teacher from India, Mushtaq Khan, who teaches in London, has developed, and that is understanding that the system of rules, which is called institutions, only work if they distribute benefits according to the balance of power between the different stakeholders. So if the rules are not well balanced, then informal rules come up. For example, feminism now has more power than 4 years ago. So there's an informal institution that tries to distribute justice, just like back in the 80s in Chile, when we had the violation of human rights here in Chile. And canceling is one of those kind of activities, trying to distribute the cost and benefit without having the real decisions being made by the legal system. And that's just one example. For example, in the city, we have other rules then. And the problem, I think, the biggest challenge that we have in Chile is that many of those informal rules are adapting to the systems in such a way that breaks us up as a society. And I think that the best example here is the not paying for your fare in the public transportation system. In normal times, 1 of every 3 didn't pay for their ticket, but and now it's no longer an exception. It's really not an exception. There are people that do it because they're angry, some because they can't pay. Also, it's a way of dissenting with society. So it's become a lot more complex. It's now an institution. It's a non-written rule in the transportation system in Santiago, not paying for the fare, because it allows the authorities to have a discourse that the system cannot be improved because people are not paying for the fare. And that is why the people say, I cannot improve the system, you're not paying for it. But then on the other end, I've had to compare the amount of people that are part of the transportation system in Santiago and also in Medellin, in Colombia. And Medellin, there's a whole story there that are very inclusive transportation system. But the transportation system in Santiago includes the poor people much more than it does in Medellin, and that's probably because people are not paying. A lot of the people can move around in public transportation in Santiago precisely because they don't pay. So it's the non-written rule that is making the city work, but it's still breaking us down morally. It's not that people are happy that they don't pay, but that's the way the city works. And that's the way that we can get authorities justifying not improving things, but people moving around because they don't pay. So aside from the constitution aside from regional power. If we do not address the rules as to how our city works, and also these unwritten rules, we're not going to be able to move forward towards a more sustainable city. Thank you, Nicolás. We do know that our friends from Denmark do develop important projects that can inspire us. So we would like to invite first Johannes to deliver his PowerPoint presentation to the audience that is with us, both here present, but also through the online version. Johannes, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen. I prepared a short presentation here. I hope you can see it all. Can you see it? Yeah. So again, the project I will talk about is called the Housing Lab, in Danish, Boliglaboratorium. A little bit about myself and my office. We are an office with about 20-25 people, based in Copenhagen with 3 partners. We sit in Copenhagen, and the capital of Denmark, and feel very privileged doing so, because Copenhagen and Denmark, the recent years, has been a very nice petri dish for experimenting with different aspects of architecture and urbanism. This is our base, and this is where we learn. This is where we do our mistakes, and then we've been lucky to work a little bit broader out in Europe. So we do architecture, housing, institutions, schools, health projects, but we also do more developing experimental projects, and this is one of them I'm going to talk about today. Many of those are tapping into how our society works, and in Scandinavia we have the so-called welfare state, which where the state has a lot of power, and we pay a lot of our income in taxes, but we accept doing that because the state handles our society quite well with those tax income. So basically, urban planning, urban development, architecture has many years been more or less governed by a very strong public sector, and organizing the private sector, the market, and the civil society under it. So what we're seeing these years is a transformation of the Danish welfare society because of, I mean, the world is changing, globalization, climate changes, demographic changes, all kind of changes. So the public sector cannot find the answers and solutions by themselves. So we're seeing that a new alliances between the private, public, and civil society is emerging to solve many of these projects. We see private operators getting into more public domain areas like healthcare and so on. We see the civil society engaging more in different tasks as well, and changing the role of the public sector more as a facilitator of these alliances. And that goes for architecture and urban development as well. What our starting point is to basically look on what are the drivers for change, what is happening, and you can say social change is one of the drivers for change, and that are very often transferred to new requirements. A little bit what the previous was talking about, the informal turning into formal legislation. So those social changes are urbanization, demography, and so on, and changes of the population in general. And again, the second driver is the cultural developments, which you can say in a population goes more towards change in dreams, transfer to dreams, and what I'm going to mainly talk about it today is the housing sector. You know, changes in what people perceive as a good home and what is needed for a good home and so on, and that affects norms for the housing. And the third driver is you can say technology, technological innovation, which transfer into new opportunities, and that is within material construction techniques and so on. And all these three drivers is interesting to analyze in each in a different context. And the Chilean context is very different from the Danish context, but I guess you can use the same optics to analyze the situation. So basically, Denmark, we have this welfare society, very, very small country, also compared to Chile. We have a population of roughly 6 million people, so we have very short distance between power and the population. We're very agile to changes, and often are ranked as one of the happiest countries in the world, whatever that means. But that has a lot to do with the quality of life, has a lot to do with the ability to affect your own life, also what Rikke is working with. And the focus for both government and municipals has been the quality of life in cities for the last 10 years, more or less successful, I have to say, because of the challenge, what I said initially, of the rapid and fast development, because there's a lot of new investments. So Denmark obviously has a long tradition for doing good quality housing for the masses, especially in the after Second World War, in the period where we built the welfare society, you can say. We had pioneers in architecture that was a part of that process of building the welfare society we have today, which also was a golden age for Danish architecture and furniture and values, you can say. So what is happening now is more a transformation of the welfare society, and that is a much more complex and difficult role to engage in these new alliances that I talked about before, between the civic and private and public sector. And this affects urban planning. It affects our housing policy and our architecture. More and more pension funds, you know, are taking care of the urban development, for example, and also urban architecture after all. So this was just some example of the sort of golden era of Danish housings. So what are we facing now? We're facing that all major cities are transforming from post-industrial cities to livable cities, which means that a lot of new investments in huge areas, even expanding into the sea in Copenhagen, are being developed in a pace where you see a lot of things being built very fast, where you see occasionally good examples of new innovative housing in different occasions, and these are what is being published from Copenhagen and Denmark in general. But the reality is that we are seeing a housing market that are just building the same types of housing, very cheap, very fast, and only accommodating the same life forms. Basically, as a scheme that is reflected on a prototypical family pattern of 2 grown-ups and 2 kids, and that is not reflecting how society really is. So we were lucky that 2 very important institutions in Denmark, the Danish Art Foundations, which is a part of the cultural ministry, the government, they have funds for each of the different art forms, including architecture. And then the large fund Realdania, which is a very special thing for Denmark. It's the world's largest fund for the built environment, and they are a ownership-owned fund that was established because of restructuring of the loaning real estate market some 20 years ago. So it's a very unique situation, but they have a lot of money and they support the built environment with research, specific projects, and so on. So we were asked to conceptualize projects about housing development in Denmark and to form a partnership with these two bodies. And what we looked at was that, okay, what's the problem in Denmark? The problem is not the individual nice projects that we see are being published from Denmark. The problem is the majority of the sector that builds for the masses, builds the affordable houses and builds in a rapid tempo, because they have no other choice of just doing what they are used to do, and have a very hard time of doing innovation by themselves. So with inspiration from the EBR principle, International Bauausstellung in German, we said that we need to make a structural attempt to do innovation for the whole sector, but in a light version. So what we did, so you can ask, why do we need this housing lab? We need to push innovation for the whole sector. We need to accommodate a new way of developing our cities and our housing architecture, so it becomes more sustainable, so it accommodates more life forms. The Danish Statistics Bureau is counting 37 different types of family forms in Denmark today. And we're mainly building to one. So those are some of the main questions that we have to face. So we were well aware that we could not change everything, but we needed to do experiments and to show them live, and to realize them in order to people to learn from them. So we were thinking, how can we make systemic change in the best way? So we formulated an housing lab that should support projects that should be realized, that were experimenting with one specific aspect that was important for the whole sector. So the project in itself, the building in itself, don't need to be revolutionary, but just have one or two aspects that it experiments with, and showcase that to the rest of Denmark and the sector, so everyone could learn from it. So the housing lab is structured in three overall parallel tracks. We have something we call housing workshops, which is I will step back and actually just describe what we did. We made an open call to the whole sector, asking for projects that were going to be realized, housing projects that are going to be realized within the present framework and laws and so on. And they needed to be fully equipped with the financial investor, the builder, the contractor, the architects, and so on. And we got 66 applications from fully finance projects that want to take part in this. So there was a huge interest from the whole sector. We only had the ability to choose 7 teams to participate in the housing lab, and those were chosen by several parameters. But we organized the housing lab in these 3 tracks: the housing workshops, and those workshops are, we have some that are open for public and the whole sector, but others are only for the 7 teams and all the participants in those teams. And they have different themes that addresses the issues they are experimenting with and the problems they are experimented with, and we invite experts within those fields and work together, all 7 teams. We have a track called Housing Knowledge, where we try to produce new knowledge, but also to publish that knowledge that comes out of the housing lab. And then the most important is the housing experiments. So in some years' time, there will be 7 projects around in Denmark showcasing those experiments. That we are in the mid of the process now, so the projects are not built yet. They are still under development, but I will tell more about that. What we published, our open call, was that we had some ambitions that we want the projects to address, and these are the ambitions. So let's get more from fewer resources. Let's offer new forms of housing. Let's use nature's potential. Let's redefine the desirable home. Let's share, and let's strengthen the good building traditions, and let's use the local potential. So these were the sort of call out we did, and we got 7 quite good projects on board. I will just run through them quite quickly. This project is called Symbiosis House, and it's lifting an agenda of transformation and the mixed city. So they had an existing office block that they want to build houses on top and create synergies between the work environment and the living environment, and so it's lifting an agenda of transformation, which it's a huge thing in the many coming years, but also how to create synergies between different programs, energy and rooftop gardens and all kind of interchanging resources between the 2 programs. So this project is ongoing at the moment. Another project is called Housing for Single Parents. Basically, it's about accommodating housing for single parents. Either they are just single or they are divorced. So how compact can you live, and what can you share with the other single parents? So basically, that is what this project is about, targeting a specific group and inhabitants that is a growing segment, especially in the larger cities. So that is lifting an agenda that we need to build more differentiated, to become have a higher degree of equity in the large cities. The multi-generational wood house is experimenting with 2 aspects. It's a project that is a collaboration with 5 of the largest housing associations building affordable houses in Denmark, and they have the power to do a structured, innovative way of developing their projects, because they have such large quantities of square meters to build. So the program here is a multi-generational house. So where you live together with young and students, you live together with seniors, you live together with families, and even you have institutional functions as an elderly and senior compartment, and even kindergartens in some of the buildings. That's one aspect to mix generations. But the other experiment is to how to build more sustainable in wood. So they have developed what they call a wooden barometer for all their projects, to see of how can they, as building associations, introduce more and more wood into their buildings in order to accommodate a lower carbon footprint. So all of these projects has also here in the middle of the process developed different kind of tools. So this is one of the tools. This is wooden barometer, which they are actually sharing with the whole sector. Yeah. Another project is called vertical courtyards, and that's might be a little bit specific aspect to experiment with, but they are trying to lift the agenda. What about the social fabric in high buildings? And what about the spaces we share and where we meet? So there's a lot of regulations and fire regulation and financing regulation that makes that difficult, because we have sub-optimized these typologies into just being an escalator and a small staircase. So how can we get back to having larger vertical shared spaces, and that the experiments here are more tapping into legal, fire regulations, financing regulations, and so on. I will get back to that. This project is about how to create a modern collective housing project but in the countryside, in a area that is declining, and they are really try to create a modern collective house form on the countryside, and that experimenting with a lot of stuff, transformation, how to do a modern open collective housing, but also how to be able to change the regulation in farming zones into mixed use zones. So there's a lot of technical issues here as well. Urban Self-Built is a project that are inspired from the German Self- and Baugruppen. I don't know if you have that in Chile, but it's a new form of ownership and developer role, where actually a civic group of civic inhabitants goes together and become the builders themselves. And this gives a whole new role for the municipal and the planning authority and so on. And they created a manual how to do this that other municipals can have and be inspired with. So here it's more the builder role they are experimenting with, an ownership role basically. This project is about, it's a huge housing complex where they want to include housing opportunities for people with cognitive difficulties or social problems. So at the same time form social, economical business models, so they can take part of maintaining and creating a social coherence in the building structure. So those were very short words on the project themselves. The themes of our workshops and housing workshops has been about future building housing needs, community building, building in wood, framework condition, and so on. And we still have some more to come about self-builders, public housing, and transformation projects here in the next years. And the last track, the housing knowledge, we are working with. We're publishing some of the knowledge that are coming out during this developing period. And latest to our latest housing workshop, we published this housing paper, which was a you can say where we analyzed the results so far, where the different teams were facing obstacles, but also where they saw opportunities. So based on that, we published 33 very, very specific recommendations to the housing sector, both to the politicians, the regulators, the developers, and so on. and we had a conference with this, and we presented it to the housing minister, and so on. And the main recommendation from the 7 teams was that there should be introduced a national experimental scheme for housing, basically. So we need a central support and constant focus on experimenting and showing specific examples of how to do it, and to learn from. And from that there was 7 main recommendations, one from each team, that were targeting different topics, from introducing life cycle assessments when a building goes out to tender, to increase budgets for public housing without increasing the rent, from creating better opportunities for sharing local resources, expanding possibilities of ownership in rural zones, introduce more project and concept tenders in domestic areas, give shared square meter a new legal status in our building regulation, which means that it becomes a different way of investing in shared square meters, creating better conditions for the housing sector to become socially inclusive, referring to some of the legal issues and difficulties of including people with cognitive difficulties in the housing schemes, and so on. And we are now working on how to push these recommendations further on to different parts of the sector, because we have a lot of recommendations, and there will be a lot of different receivers of those recommendations. But already now we know that we have an upcoming new national architecture policy from the government, and we know that many of these inputs and recommendations will inspire them. They have been present in our process. We know that the people that are formulating the building regulation, they have been part of our workshops and also receivers of the recommendations, and so on. So it's about pushing the whole systemic build up around the housing sector. And in 2023, the UEA conference, World Congress, will be held in Copenhagen, and there we will take part and exhibit the projects and talk more about them. And hopefully we will also see a housing lab round 2.0, where we can continue the great work. So and in the future, maybe 2026, we hope that there will be 7 projects to showcase around Denmark as specific experiments, but influencing the whole sector. These were my words, and I will stop the screen sharing now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Johannes.
See if I can.
This round of applause was for you.
Oh, thanks.
It's really interesting when the civil society, the public and the private can talk together. You can make a much better life quality. Thank you so very much, Johannes, for your presentation. Before going into Rikke's presentation, remember with that GAM channel of YouTube, you can use that to send your questions, which will be entertained at the end of the 2 presentations. Rikke, you are recognized.
So you see my screen now? Good.
Yes, we do.
Good. Yes, so to start with the beginning, my name is Rikke Rohr and I am originally an architect. And then I'm born and raised in Copenhagen in a very special area called the South Harbor of Copenhagen. And that is special because there is this old tradition of being self-builders, which I also became, as the picture shows. And I'll come back to that later. But as a citizen in Copenhagen, I have always been very interested in the development of the city ever since I was a child. And when I was a teenager, I decided to go and study this at the academy because I did not understand these buildings popping up on the front of our harbor, showing one of them here. And it was these buildings of glass and steel and bricks that I simply couldn't understand the qualities of, and I felt they were destroying the atmosphere of my city. So I decided to go to the academy to see if anyone could explain to me the qualities, or of course, if no one could, I wanted to try and make sure we did better in the future. And ironically enough, after 1 year of studies, I was kind of headhunted for an architectural position in this particular building. And once I got inside, I could totally understand the qualities of the architecture, because that's where all the energy was left, I would say. But it also made it very clear that it was for the employees and still didn't give anything back to the city. And ever since, I've been very concerned about what we can, what tools are important to make sure it's both giving the employees and the private people something, and the city. And I could look to the other side of the harbor and see how successful it could be if you were aware of having the ambition of keeping the trails of the history of the harbor, and you let the people use the area. And because I have to keep the time short, I'm not going into the topic as such, but that's the background of my interest. And then during my studies, I also got this chance of becoming a self-builder myself in this area. So I decided to do that. And I decided to do it for 3 reasons. First of all, because I wanted to learn what I was asking craftsmen to do as an architect. I did not get that knowledge at the academy anymore. In the old days, to become an architect, you had to be a craftsman first. It was like this master. But nowadays, you can get through the academy without ever building anything physically. So I wanted to get that knowledge. And then I wanted to show my neighbors that it's still possible to build your own house in that area, because more and more people said, nowadays the legislation is so hard to understand and demands are so high that you cannot do that anymore. And all my neighbors had these prefab houses built around my spot. So I wanted to show that even I'm only I'm a very small person, and I was a single woman, and I could still build this house. And then also to contribute to these that the area had this personal vibe, that every house is expressing the person who's living inside the house. Another interesting thing happened in that period, because when I was building my house, there was this invitation for all citizens of the area to come to a hearing to discuss whether one of these green areas should be saved for further generations. And I recall that we were invited to come to this hearing on a work day, on a Tuesday around 1 p.m. That's the middle of the day in Denmark. So I was wondering how many people go to work in the morning. In the middle of the day, they take time off to go home to the area where they live, just to say, yes, I like the area, I would like us to keep it, and then go back to work or take half a day off. But I did so myself, and I was possibly surprised, because a lot of people did. The room was filled with people with good arguments for saving this area. I think we were around 100 people, and not only local people, a lot of local people, but also people from around Copenhagen, people with stress diseases who came and said, this is the only place where I can forget that I'm in the middle of this hectic capital and just look on the horizon and get back to a normal life. So I think the arguments were very strong, but it had no result. It was not safe for the future. So I kept that in the back of my head, that I should be very aware as an architect where I decide to work, because I got worried that I would do more damage than good. This is just a picture of the lovely area where citizens are taking care of these animals who are taking care of the green, and where we also have this little area for people that we call people living on the edge. And that is one of the few places in Copenhagen there are room for people like that. And it's the diversity that I'm very aware of, that I love, and that I would like to make sure everybody understands before it's too late, before it's gone. So all these things were in the back of my head. And the next time I got aware, it was when there was this area in the middle of Copenhagen where they wanted to tear down these beautiful old buildings. And it was not my area, so I just followed it just on Facebook and stuff. And I could see that the citizens had done everything right to get attention to this area. They made this big event where they invited people to come and explain the economic prospects of keeping it, why we should do that for the future. And there was all these official architects that are supposed to advise our politicians. They were also out saying this is a great architecture, and historians were out in the public saying it's important for us to understand our history, that we keep these buildings and stuff. And the local people also got very engaged. I think there was around 300 letters in this hearing process saying the citizens wanted to keep this place. So I think the Danish people did everything right, and everything that is they're supposed to do if they want to get heard in the processes. And then there even was this election where you could see that the voters voted for the parties that wanted to save the area. And even though they ended up allowing a private developer to tear down the buildings and build his quick and of course more efficient buildings for him. So I did this this big event, even though I knew it was too late to save the buildings, but because I didn't want the politicians to be allowed to do this with just in silence, because I was very afraid what it would do to the people that engaged themselves so much in this process and didn't get any result out of it. And so I made this big protest event, quite beautiful, and it was in February in Denmark. That's a very cold month, and even though I had in 2 weeks 700 people showing up to protect this area, but still it didn't change anything. And the next time the politician did something similar, it was when we had this legislation that is supposed to protect our nature for further future generations. And at the year of 2018, it was turning 100 years old, this legislation. And that was the year when we, for the first time, had a government who wanted to go against it. It's this little green area on the picture. And as you can see, there's a lot of building around it. And maybe you can guess that all these boats, there's like a very special atmosphere in this area. So to build modern buildings in the green area would totally change the whole area. And there's been, again, a lot of architects and historians and all these democratic processes around it to secure it that has been vouching for it to be saved. And even though the politicians decided they wanted to break with this we call triangle of power, of democratic power. So suddenly they wanted to not only make the legislation, they also want to be the ones evaluating if things are worth keeping or not. And that's when I got really worried. So I decided to do this big public meeting about democracy and urban development, because through all my different experiences as an architect and as a student and a self-builder, I knew so much now that I could hear that wasn't common knowledge. So I wanted to lift the entire knowledge of the people in this area. And when I say the people, I mean everyone. It's from the high school student, but also the politicians themselves, because I could hear they didn't understand what power they have to demand higher quality from us architects or developers or citizens. So that was my aim, to make this one stage where everyone should be on the same stage and talk about the topic from all angles. And nobody should be able to point at someone who was not there. Because that's what I found out that we do a lot. Architects meet, and we agree that, yeah, it's the customers who do not want to pay for the quality, or the politician says, yeah, it's the voters who doesn't vote for us if we work with car-free city areas or stuff like that. So I simply just started to engage people using both like physical meetings and the SOMI channels and stuff. And as you can see, I had all kinds of people involved. In 8 weeks, I had 100 people involved in making this big meeting. And as you can see, there was also a lot of participants, around 2,000. And on the stage, there was all these different people that has a saying in what kind of urban development we are making. And we had different debates. We had one about what the quality of this area, South Harbor, is. And that was the most touching one, I would say. Even I got surprised of corners that I didn't know about. But also we had this final event about the green area I just showed you guys. And there was a teacher from the School of Architecture who had been taking her students out to do the analysis of the area that the politicians did not do because they rushed this thing through, right? And we had the local citizens telling about the qualities of the area. We had the city architects telling everyone about the qualities, but also how things work. And we have had the CEO of architectural studio who had said no to participate in competition about the building on the area simply because their morals said we cannot build on that place that was supposed to be saved for a new, as a nature spot for future generations. And then we had the politicians responsible for the decision. And we had the politicians from the same party on a local level and a higher level. And that was very interesting because they were not agreeing. And I think it's very important that we allow this discussion to be out in the open, because otherwise we lose the trust that we're talking about is so important. So I think all of us need to be more aware of the whole mechanism and our own role in this, because I also want to make sure that the citizens know they can also vote with their money, for example, and be aware of what their pension money is going to and stuff like that. So it's not only to point at the politicians or the developers, it's all around that we should be able to, if we point, also listen. And and I've immediately I felt that apparently it was very much missed also from the architect's point of view, because I got this prize after only 5 months after that. Made me understand that I'm not like a single architect having these speculations and issues with my moral, you could say. It's a big concern, but it's so complex that I think it's not easy to be both a working architect and then be so open about the problems. So that's why I decided to go on this path and be the one talking about it for some years at least. And that is now the reason why I'm a CEO in this School of Democracy NGO, because when I did the South Harbor folk meeting, I called it, I found out that the people are not, or maybe they're too happy in Denmark, actually, as we talked about before, to really engage in such things. Because after this successful meeting, I held this evaluation dinner, and among the 100 volunteers, I think there was around 30 showing up, which is great, I would say. And I asked them, how did you think it went? And everyone was very happy. And I asked them, should we do it again next year? And everyone was yes. And I was like, okay, who wants to participate and have a role? Everybody wanted to be part of it. And then I said, okay, then we need to be more people taking a little bit responsibility for the different areas, because I had all the hats on, you could say in Danish, you would say that. So I was like, who wants to be in charge of the coordinating the volunteers? Nobody wanted to have that role. Who wants to be in charge of fundraising? No one did. Who wants to be in charge of talking to the press, make sure we get out in the public and get seen? Nobody wanted that. Even the board was very hard to fill with dedicated people. But at the same time, it was such a huge success. So it would be such a shame to just drop it. So I quickly learned how to run this as a single person. And then I said to the board, then we need to fundraise for at least my salary. Then I can skip being an architect and do this instead. And that became the strategy. So in 2020, that was the strategy. But again, I was the only one present in the whole preparation, and actually also on the day I was the only one from the board showing up. So that's not a very it's not you couldn't call it like a public event arranged by like a group, which the name says, like folk meeting. So I simply had to leave it, and then now I'm here where people are like want to work with me, you could say. You have to go where people want to work on the same level, and that's the hard part, I think, to make people agree. And as we talked about in Denmark, maybe we're a little too happy, because we are doing a lot of good things and we are making great urban development many places. But I know we have been doing better in the former years, and I know that we can do even better. So I can't help having that ambition. But most of all, I want to make sure that people are not giving up on getting involved. So it's a process still going on. I would say I do not have a lot of answers, but these are my experiences.
Well, thank you so much for that, Rikke. Thank you for the great work that you're doing in the Democracy School. I would like now to pass the floor to Soledad, who's also got a presentation on the work that she's done at her foundation. I'm a little cold here. Yes, we're going to try and change the room temperature here. It's a little bit cold. Very, very inspiring, I have to say. My name is Soledad Díaz. I want to thank GAM because we have been here before for other type of events also, and we do have different lines of work that we carry out throughout the year. I also want to thank the Embassy of Denmark. When we were invited, I started thinking about the things that we do together, and actually it's quite a few things. Back in 2016, when I started this foundation, we went to Copenhagen and we had meetings there with the Danish Architecture Center, and we went to other countries, to all of the countries, all of those Nordic countries. And there's quite a strong concept that's not used much in Spanish, but it's the built environment, which is a very comprehensive approach toward the environment. So in our foundation, what we have tried to do is precisely to include the built environment as a comprehensive concept, but it's very difficult because they're saying, but are you working on heritage? Are you an architecture office? Do you work with festivals? Well, we work with communities in order to improve their surroundings. And these surroundings, these environments are complex. Social environmental issues, heritage issues, contemporary architecture issues. So in the last 5 years that we have formally being around, we have been developing that muscle. And for a few years now, we have been working also in becoming one of these sponsoring agencies with the Ministry of Housing in order to start building social housing. And that's the major leagues for us. So we want to talk today about the work that we do with communities. As I was saying then, in Fundación Aldea, we work with education, we work on publications. We are professional activists, but also collectively activists in human rights, heritage, and housing. That's what you can see in some of the pictures that I'm showing here. So each of the projects that we start with are multidisciplinary. There are architects, and many of the things start from architecture, but architecture doesn't solve or doesn't bring the answers to all of our questions. So we have lawyers, historians, social workers, and obviously architects. So putting this into context, especially for our friends in Denmark, on October the 18th, one of the slogans is that Chile finally woke up. So with regards to this presentation, this talks about the need that communities and people have in trying to impact and having an incidence on their space. And also we are questioning, and this is something that came up, we are questioning the official stories that are being told to us. What is our heritage? Which are the stories that are more or less important? Because a small community down in the south, why should they know more about a certain war hero than they do about their local reality and history? So these are the things that we are trying to do by using local resources too. And we try to voice these questions too that come from October the 18th and obviously from farther back too. So what I want to talk to you about is precisely about the work model that we have been developing, and which is not based on stages. Rather, it's more of a snowball effect because each stage drags on the next one. And each community is unique. Therefore, that's why we've decided to use this methodology. When we come to a community, the community has a certain issue or problem that obviously they want to overcome, and they see us as a collaborator that can give them tools either from heritage or from the architecture standpoint. So the first thing that we do is that we try to organize ourselves. Are we going to be putting together working tables, and who will participate in each of them? And we try to bring the main stakeholders. It could be the community leaders. It could be some people from the sports club, or maybe other local people too at the national or regional level. We set up then the map, and we try and look at the conflict map too. That means basically we need to really understand where we are so that we can address the whole thing. But we also do a social spatial analysis of the place. And that's when we ask, what is the heritage? Looking at it from the historical point of view, how did this community come to be? And we wonder, what are some of the cultural practices that these people currently do? What are the construction materials that they are using? What are the conflicts, etc.? And based on this, we put together a methodology. And also, we work with a lot of dissemination. We create social media if that is needed. We do visual records of everything that we do. And we always try to put a symbolic calendar too. That is to say that in the communities, we can have a landmark, maybe the day when they started setting up their houses, the anniversary of someone that is key for the community, or October the 18th, as was in the case of Santiago. We are an agent of change, and that's precisely what the communities expect of us. We go to some symbolic meetings, activities, if we are invited. We're constantly looking for funding, and we can always try and apply to grants so that we can get funds. And one of the things that we haven't done is assessments. And we need to start challenging ourselves in order to do that. We're beginning to do that, but very slowly. Well, in the model, we also, the second stage is where we do a lot of participatory design according to the community. We work with children, with the elderly, and whoever else needs to be included. And then we do a diagnosis and a preliminary design, and then we adjust the methodology based on what we've learned from the community. And then on stage 3, we should have a design more or less prepared of the whole architecture project that the community has requested of us. And we show them, and then we make the final adjustments. As you can see on this image, this is the initial blueprint of the map of the park, and then the community starts making changes or comments to it. We start with a base team, and then we get the specialist on energy efficiency, on electricity, or whatever specialty may be needed. And then we also have educational activities. We can have radio programs, we can have a podcast, or anything you can think of. These helps us to go deeper on the educational side of this. Now, on the fourth stage, we always work with the communities. We put together roundtables and we engage with the community, and we present then the final architecture project. And one of the things that we have included recently is that within the presentation of this architectural project, based on that, we always say how we're going to build it, because oftentimes we end up with a nice blueprint and there's not enough money to actually build this great dream. So now we have included the management plan, which includes administration, how we're going to raise the funds. We might get people from the community who are not the leaders who want to participate in the whole management plan. And then the other thing is the construction plan. Even if we have a very little money, we always do some kind of construction within this whole design plan so that we can have a continuum and we can at least start. So we are also minor works constructors. So we have the permits, we can construct, we have shovels, we have the workers that can participate in the construction. And then the last bit is the management plan is handed over. We do the participative construction, and the dossier is handed over to the community. This dossier is a very important document for the community because we can build all of the project, or if not, the community can do the building of it later on through the municipality, or they can find the rest of the funding to finish the construction. And these are two projects that you can see here. We've been working with these communities for 4 years. This is San Pedro de Atacama. It's an indigenous community, and they have lots of ancestral ritual sites, traditional sites, like a sacred lagoon that they've got here. Well, for tourists, these are tourist sites, but these, you can see that here they're blocking the road. They're saying that we need to improve the place before tourists can go back to visit these landscapes. And they've asked us to have a long-term plan with previous staged projects so that they could manage, they can handle their cultural localities. And this is a community that is very much an inward community. And so we had to do a whole social spatial analysis. We had to work out on the field with them. We had to see all of their culture, all of their rituals, all of their reality, that they were leaving aside a part of the way that they do their construction, and it was being replaced by cement. And this is one of the things that we helped them with. We had the classical participatory meetings, but most of them were being out there on the field. And here on the last slide, on the last picture, you can see that we ended up in the municipality where we shared with them a pack of 10 projects to the mayor, and the mayor was highly impacted. This is a community that has short, scarce resources. They do get funding, especially from tourism, but they don't have enough for them to develop the projects. So they say, they told them, we've got the projects ready. Tell us, how can you fund us in order to start building and implementing them? And that's the way that we worked. We got there with a whole portfolio of 10 projects in the end. Altogether, we're highly influenced by some of the legends. These are projects that have connections to their cultural realities, and we developed it based on many of the legends that they have. Since the municipality did have funds in order to build the first project, which is the house for the forest ranger, in this area that they had originally blocked. And then in this shelter, in this house, and it's quite a challenge because this is at 4,000 meters above sea level and 300 kilometers from the largest city nearby. We put together then a quarry, and we took out the rocks ourselves in order to build this house. And since we are also a construction company, we had an internal bid. I mean, we put together the terms of reference, and this was shared to the workers that participated from the community. And one of them, Dagoberto is his name, was awarded the tender. And they were then in charge of the construction, and we were there as a supervising entity. Now, when you go there, instead of paying the entrance to a tour agency, we are paying the entrance to the community people, and they even changed the name. It is now called Piedras Rojas. If you've been to San Pedro de Atacama, you will see people taking pictures in this building that is built with these kind of rocks. I'm coming to an end here, but this is basically the same idea. This is in an urban area. This is now in Santiago. And by the way, we continue working with the community. In these cases, now it's in Socaire. We have a beautiful challenge ahead of us. And 90 kilometers away from this town, they build social houses that are beautiful. And the challenge is to start building these kind of houses with energy efficiency. And currently we are in a project with the Royal Danish Academy, where we're trying to research about architecture in extreme weather locations. And that's one of the cases that we're working with. We work with 4 different environments, or they work with 4 different environments, and one of them is this one in San Pedro de Atacama. This one is in the neighborhood of La Pincoya in Santiago, a very poor neighborhood, and it's a very comprehensive. We got here to this abandoned site, and we said we're going to develop an urban here. And the leader from the site told us, or from the neighborhood told us, that they do have some heritage here. So we decided working on this based on the information that we got from the community itself. The heritage is a land that was taken over by the population, and this is a community group that really respects the elderly too. They are called the founders in this area. So we work with the founders, with this elderly population in this community. You can see here the founders are looking at the blueprints, working with participatory design, also with children. But the founders were considered the owners in this project. This is a 7,500 square meter. We do not have enough money to fund everything, so we've been doing it in stage. The initial amount that we had for the design stage allowed us to do the first stage construction, and we paid each of the different crews we had for landscape crew, construction crew, food crew. And that's very important because construction, we think it's usually labor, but also the food that they require. We paid them, and we paid the food crew. We paid them the exact same amount that we paid the landscape crew. And then we also had a crew based on the memory and heritage. So this is the site, as you can see, and it's got a stream, and we are currently working on making all of the necessary paperwork to legalize it. We've got ponds here. I mean, this is something that's unique to have water springs coming up in abandoned pieces of land. Now, this stage is not actually the ending stage. I mean, we bring it to a close here, but they can continue developing as they are able to raise more funds. And aside from the leaders, there is a cooperative that has been formed. You can see the logos here. It's Women, Sustainability, and Land. This is the most significant leitmotifs that they use, and they are trying to get the resources for the livelihood, and they're putting together orchards here. I think that I've exceeded the time originally allocated to me. So I want to thank you, and well, you can follow us in the social media. Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrea. I'm sorry. Soledad, I apologize. Thank you, Soledad, for the work that you are doing in promoting a more participative and sustainable society with the combination that you do with architecture and learning. Thank you so much.
Nicolás, you don't have a presentation, I know that, but since we were listening to our Danish friends and colleagues, could you please share with us what are the lessons from our Danish friends so that we can use their here in Chile? Well, I do have a presentation. I was invited to present. I will not use PowerPoint though. Let me. No, it's okay. I would like to try to share with you a couple of ideas. I'll be adapting some of them to the presentation. What here? Of course, the the main track is change in the democratic context. And something which is common to all presentations is co-construction, co-building, how we co-build things. Let me try to offer a couple of thoughts from the academia, from the political activism, but from the perspective of a Latin American view, which in Chile we could stop feeling as these oases, these exceptional case in Latin America. That I mean, I'm happy to share with the Denmark and the North, the South, but in Chile sometimes we believe that that it's just us and Denmark and nothing in the middle. So I believe it's important to ask many of these questions, and I would like to discuss what are the organizations for change in the city, but from the southern perspective. And as I said, my institutions, I'm in set of rules. So that's what I study, which is a relationship between territorial inequalities and infrastructure, but from the point of view, the set of rules to make that infrastructure work. If you want to know more, if you want to learn more about my remarks, there was a paper by ECLAC in a book called Future of Equality in Latin America and the Caribbean. There's a paper addressing these things equally free in the city. And again, our comparisons between Santiago and Medellin. You can always ask me, use Valenzuela Levy. It's my Twitter account as well as in Instagram. And there are some Urbanista Popular. It's a podcast which elaborates on these topics as well. So when we think of our sustainable architecture, it's important to ask, what do we mean by architecture? So I must say I'm very close to this feeling that the architecture was not enough as Rikke is it was she's no longer a student of architecture to become a community activist. Community activism is actually architecture, but much wider than that. So especially in our architecture schools, architecture is seen as if the attributes of a given system, the architecture of a system, or architecture to become a construction system, or how the city is structured, as if that would be architects. In a way, it's the same, but I would make a clear separation as to the type of knowledge relative to the environment, which is much Anglo-Saxon. There's a schools of a built environment, and we could use this a bit more that around here. That's a type of knowledge, and that's a type of problem. And a different thing is architects. In Chile, our environment, it's also a neoliberal, or your background on your degree to sign the drawings are issued by the same organization. So that's you have education as a business, and therefore we are full of architects. That's our environment, and architecture is until it's within this context. Architecture, to discuss sustainable architecture, is just a passport into city issues. Some schools, they discuss topics. They are very specialized, but I would say that in Chile, given the deregulation of education, architects do many other things. Unfortunately, it's not just those built environment topics. So by architecture, I mean the architecture of systems, basically design as a whole. The issue clearly is the focus on co-production of such a design of the city. All the systems, transportation, garbage collection, the air. Have you seen the air in Santiago these days? I mean, did you get tired? I ride my bike back and forth. Fortunately, we are having a more ecosystem-wide view. We're thinking that probably we'll have to think or maybe remove sound systems which we consider fundamental for our life. So how we do this co-production? Johannes' presentation, I mean, that makes me jealous. I mean, how with the housing deficit we have, I mean, we should have, I mean, to have a policy for experimental housing. I mean, when I first read that, wow, that was amazing. But this is not a wild thought. I mean, you mentioned vertical ghettos, so these are huge, tall high-rises in Estación Central. People forget that early in the 90s in downtown Santiago, I live here in the San Borja district, that they were built back in the 60s with the Soviet influence. There were a couple of high-rises here in Providencia, and even near the mountains, there were very few tall buildings. But developers like Johannes has shown, they thought that this was not a good business. Remember the Paz Freumovich buildings? There are many other builders now, developers, but very few people know that for reactivating the repopulation of Santiago, the city of Santiago, through an organization called or an exception to the only in Santiago and Valdivia have their own developers. This is an exception according to the law. That the cities do not run businesses, but probably the new constitution they will. But that allowed for the city to have some real estate development as an experimentation at the Yungay district. But the real estate, this is an innovation we see as not that good, but that's an innovation. Building tall buildings and thinking as an affordable real estate project. That was something new. So the public sector did these built these examples that went into the business and showed the privates how to do things around 1995. That is an example. Clearly, these ended up in these vertical ghettos or tall buildings, high rises. But we have to make changes, how the industry works, how the market works. It's this industrial policy, but in Chile, we don't talk about those things. There are industrial districts. The only thing we change is for the industry of health, the industry of education. Social rights translated into an industry, in the sense of producing things. But the big question is, how do we make such a change? So co-production here is critical, but difficult. Let me offer a couple of examples of why. Number of challenges, let's say water. We have a huge discussion here in Chile. I believe the ground rules will change around water. And I wish it will be so. But thinking of the responsible use of water. Water should not be private. This is the only country with private water. But my position, maybe I'm speaking too loud or too close to the microphone. But water, I believe, should not be free because there is an incentive just not to shut the faucet. Water should not be private, but it is still important to put a price on water so that we don't just keep the water running because there is a lack of water. That's a challenge. systems and infrastructures to distribution, processing, uptaking of water, but also policies to individually comply with certain sustainable behaviors relative to water. These might sound obvious or controversial. Do you want to have free water? Yes? No? I believe that yes, but then I say, okay, but it's free. I mean, the water will be out there running freely. So we need a way to make people to shut the faucet down. So we have to find an agreement, such as social pact that will allow for the system to operate. Changing the ground rules, just the behavior, our ultimate behavior, but also how we distribute, who will fund the water distribution, what communities will water reach. If we have a scarcity of water, who will get water. Human consumption has to be a priority over mining operations, for instance. And everything becomes controversial, but we need co-production, producing the infrastructure, producing the service, but also producing the behavior, as we see that. And the same is true for transport. We don't bike lanes, nobody using it. That doesn't make sense. So we'll have to force people to use bikes. I mean, there are things where we'll have to build some sort of an agreement, some sort of a set of rules, including behaviors and infrastructure. Co-production is important. Written rules there are not necessarily enough. Some went with a more liberal approach. But I'm not a liberal, but this approach of incentives, price, and things, they love that kind of discussion. But I believe the moral economy, how we build common values, finding certain behaviors, that's critical but challenging. How can you? I mean, we can go back to the moral discourse. Is it the moral condemnation to evasion can be as strong as so as to avoid it? That I'm angry, that the system is not working. Some places in Medellin, in Colombia, they focus on building a dynamic around awarding civic value. The payment card is called Civica. These are an ideology. We have to build to have common beliefs as how we should behave. That's also our rules. That's the culture. That's also something you should build. That's why we're morally broken down when we all know that we're doing things wrong. That's a huge challenge. The second art of co-production, conflict, sustainable transport based on trains, which is a beautiful discussion, which I believe it's great. But using trains, we studied cities in the OECD and OECD countries, and in Europe, there is a whole plan to promote trains because of less emissions. But there is an existing infrastructure. And one of the things that happened, unlike cities, between Latin American cities and European cities, is that urbanization of European countries happened in times where there were no cost-effective technologies such as the cars. With a loan market, which would expand access to it. So many cities in Chile and Latin America, where there is a huge number of cars, not or motorbikes, not necessarily for personal consumption or family consumption, but to render a service, such as Uber. But way before that, way before Uber, not in Santiago, but in regional, out in the regions, the main public transportation is a third world collective taxi system. I live in Rancagua, but in El Teniente copper mine, You get your severance pay, and what the first thing you do is to buy a car to use it as a collective taxi. Back in 2002, when we first begun the Santiago transportation system, there were 800 entrepreneurs, bus owners, and the administration back then announced regulations, and there was a huge strike, which that's where we had to use the anti-terrorist law for the first time, because the whole city was shut down. When you have groups rendering the necessary services, I mean, collective taxis are necessary where there were no buses, but that's not sustainable. So what do? So in Chile, and the same is true in the rest of the not only in Santiago, so they had these the bidding processes for public transportation. In the PhD thesis in Cambridge, I interviewed lots of people here in Santiago and Medellin. They used to say that they have learned from the Transantiago, so as not to do the same thing. Under this logic of co-production that you refer to, since in Medellin, you have seen the movie Narcos, or Medellin, which to be a very dangerous place run by the drug lords. Back then, they made the decision so as not to offer those tenders and working with the illegal operators. Medellin is like it's lots of hills. Well. So back up in the hills, there were illegal operators. So what they did was to negotiate with them, work with them, so that they could become cooperatives, offer them resources to buy new buses, would force them to improve their standard. So they went to these different neighborhoods, and so they taught them how to become bus drivers, so that therefore avoiding them from joining these drug lord forces. Today, they have a system where the fee or rate evasion, it's less than 1%. They decided to do it differently. So that's an issue with conflict when you have to overlap weaknesses which are not sustainable. You cannot just implement a new system in here in Latin America or in Asia or Africa, and I will just change one thing for exactly the same thing. We have to change the approach, and like you said when you talked about these dossiers as to the follow-up of projects, the expansion of social rights, they all aim at the Danish welfare state, but the government, the state, should not be an exception. Now we will have to learn that design is not just the design of something that is given as an exception. We need collective systems and design them in an ongoing design, house as a service rather than a thing. And that's a huge, gigantic challenge. So great to be in this discussion and talk about co-production from here and Northern Europe countries. Let's not talk about not only about Northern Europe, but also South.
Okay, we do have some questions from the audience who is connected, and I apologize that we've extended the time, but this is a very interesting topic. So I do have some questions from the people that are connected via YouTube. So two questions that I want to present, and then we'll see whether the people here present want to ask any questions to Johannes, Nicolás, or Soledad, because Rikke had to leave. She had prior commitments. So, Johannes, are you there? Are you connected?
Yes, I am.
Javier Tapia asks Johannes the following question. You talked about, or people talk about a biological model or biological concept to create the models. How can we relate that to the concept of a coexistence?
Oh, that was a very complex question. I think that in order to accommodate some of the big issues that the globe is facing today, and I acknowledge that we have some overall similar conditions that we have to meet, but there are also very different issues if you compare Denmark and Chile. But what is common is that we always need to have a systemic view on things, that in order to have good urban development and cities that work in a good way, that we have to have a systemic view. Sustainability is such a used and misinterpreted word, but still there's been several attempts in recent years to put sustainability on a formal, or to create systems where you give certificates to things being sustainable or not, creating demands in building regulations and so on. And we all know the 17 ones from the UN Charter, from the UN CTS, but also different approaches to sustainability. I think looking into, if you have a systemic approach, obviously you can learn a lot from biological systems and their interrelated, how can you say that? I mean, they are necessary for each other to exist, and they cannot exist alone. And what we discuss here in the Nordic countries is that there will be no environmental sustainability or economical sustainability if there is no social sustainability. And I think the investors, all the money makers, fast developers, they also are increasingly being aware of this, that in order to have a coherent city, in order to earn money, in order to have environmental sustainability, you need the social fabric to also be sustainable. So I think that is a very, you can say, I don't know if it's directly inspired from the biology, but that things are interrelated, and the notions here about coexistence and co-creations is absolutely relevant approach to it. And our housing lab is a humble attempt to involve the whole sector. It's a parameter for these projects that all stakeholders around a project is on the table from the beginning, which means the developers, the money makers, the contractors, the builders, the architects, the engineers, the biologists, and so on, so that they work closely together from the beginning. I think that was my remark on that very relevant but difficult question.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that answer, Johannes. I think that has been very well answered. Nicolás, we've got a question for you from YouTube channel, which says the following. This is from someone called Ciudadano Intermodal. I know who he is. That is Pablo Arriagada. Traditionally, metro has been like a bunker when going from one territory to the other. In the new context, then, how can the subway, metro, how can it be more permeable? First of all, I want to say that as a member, as a member of the subway, I cannot say things that go against the official vision that the subway metro has. But I would like to give a bit of a context in order to answer or address that question. The definitions on the infrastructure here in Santiago means that decisions are made without considering all the variables, very isolated. I'll give you one example. We have a system where the Ministry of Public Works funds the investment for the new subway lines. For that investment to be approved in the Ministry of Finance, it has to go through a social assessment of project. So the first problem is that we evaluate the project. For example, the train between Santiago and Valparaiso is being evaluated. So we're thinking about whether it is financially profitable. But the whole logic should be looking at a network, looking at a planning to see whether this more comprehensive approach is profitable, and then we build it by parts. But evaluating the larger network, not evaluating the sub-projects. So that's the first problem. The second problem is, for it to be profitable, even socially profitable, costs have to decrease and the social benefits have got to increase. And this means that metro or subway, it also has a limit as to what it can or cannot do. So it can only work on transportation, so we cannot do other things that could create other alternatives. So when we evaluate where will the stations be, there's usually a trend to try and have them as a national public good, and these are usually the green areas in the different communities, and that's why metro it's so invasive. In London, for example, it's a very dense subway, but usually these are buildings where the stations are placed. And that could even create finance alternatives. But everything here is separated. One entity sees one thing, another entity sees other thing, and even the assessment entities do not allow for the integration. So I hope that we can have a conversation at the public policies for investment level that will allow for further integration. Otherwise, we cannot do that. You can try and get the metro or the subway to be more integrated, but you cannot do it with the current structure that we have. Thank you, Nicolás, for your time and for answering that question. I want to thank also Johannes for having been with us. We're going to bring then this seminar to an end. I think that it has been an excellent conversation where we have had different points of view. All of the points of view are also welcome. I want them to thank the members of the panel for having shared their experience, for answering their questions, and we hope to see you soon in the next meeting, which will be virtual on the 22nd, so that we can talk about art and sustainability. There we will have Hannes Halpi, who is a consultant on sustainability. Also Green Rose, artistic director of Sister Hope, and Italo Tai, who is an actor, a dancer, and choreographer. Lastly, we want to thank our partners, the Royal Embassy of Denmark, the GAM team who have been working on this streaming service. Thank you, Johannes. Thank you, Soledad. And thank you, Nicolás. Sorry, just a correction. It's on the 22nd, June the 22nd, not the 21st. Art and sustainability. Thank you so much.